On July 5, 1943, the German 4th Panzer Army, under General Hermann Hoth, expected another victory. The seasoned tank crews believed their Panzer Ausf. G recently introduced Panther Ausf. D and Tiger I tanks would easily outclass anything the Red Army could field. They had dismissed previous reports about the capabilities of the Soviet T-34-76 tanks as exaggerations from inexperienced troops. Within just 39 minutes, this assumption would be shattered by events near Prokhorovka. Over 70 German tanks would be destroyed or disabled before the hour was finished. By the morning of July 5, German units, including the 11th and 13th Panzer Divisions, formed a powerful armored spearhead supported by 2,700 tanks and assault guns, 187 of them Panther Ausf. D, featuring 80 frontal armor and a 75 kW K-42 L-70 gun. Opposing them were Soviet forces under Colonel General Nikolai Vatutin, with the Voronezh Front fielding over 300 T-34-76 and 84 KV-1 tanks along a 15-kilometer front. Reports documented Panther tanks' unreliability, but German confidence rested on superior optics and range. The unexpected factor lay in Soviet tactics and numbers. When Colonel General Vatutin ordered the T-34-76s to advance in massed formations, using rapid flanking maneuvers, the German tactical doctrine failed to adapt. In less than 40 minutes, the German front defenses collapsed, tank crews abandoning burning vehicles under concentrated Soviet fire. What unfolded would undermine the Wehrmacht's faith in its armored superiority, setting the stage for a critical battle whose outcome would be determined in less than an hour. July 5, 1943, 4:30 hours. General Hermann Hoth issued orders from his forward command post near Prokhorovka on the southern sector of the Kursk salient. His 4th Panzer Army's objective was the breakthrough of Soviet defensive lines between Bykovka and Prokhorovka, to split the Voronezh Front and encircle major Soviet formations. Committing the 11th and 13th Panzer Divisions, Hoth's armored force included 300 Panzer Ausf. G, 187 Panther Ausf. D, and 42 Tiger I tanks, supported by mechanized infantry and 88 flak batteries. On the Soviet side, Colonel General Nikolai Vatutin commanded the Voronezh Front, deploying the 5th Guards Tank Army and 1st Tank Army near Prokhorovka. Soviet defenses relied on over 300 T-34-76 tanks, 84 KV-1 heavy tanks with 75 armor and anti-tank artillery, including the 76. 2 Mzai S-3 field gun. Deployed in depth behind earthworks and anti-tank ditches, Soviet lines protected critical bridges over the Sel River and key supply routes into Kursk city. German planners anticipated a rapid advance by exploiting the Panther's 3,500-meter gun range and the Tiger's thick armor. Intelligence from aerial reconnaissance and signal corps intercepts estimated the Soviet armored reserve at less than 200 operational tanks. Yet, technical reports dated July 3 highlighted repeated transmission failures in the new Panther tanks, and Soviet deception operations involving dummy tank positions and concealed trenches blurred the true strength and locations of Vatutin's armored units. The early summer terrain around Prokhorovka created further complexity. Open steppe interspersed with wheat fields, reducing average visibility to 1,500 meters due to dust and early morning haze. The Soviets exploited these environmental factors, masking their armored concentrations until the last possible moment. What happened in the next 39 minutes would determine the fate of the German southern offensive at Kursk. At 5:15 hours, the 1st German armored elements of Panzer Regiment 39 under Oberst Hermann von Oppeln-Bronikowski advanced northeast of Prokhorovka. Crews in Panzer Ausf. G tanks, each mounting a 75 kW K-40L-48 gun and 80 frontal armor, reported initial progress against Soviet minefields, with combat engineers clearing paths under machine gun cover. The terrain comprised gently rising ridgelines and wheat, providing only intermittent cover. At 5:25 hours, defensive positions manned by Major Pyotr Kurachkin of the 32nd Tank Brigade responded. Soviet T-34-76 tanks with 45 turret armor and 500 horsepower V2 diesel engines, surged forward in echelon formation. Soviet gunners targeted Panther's exposed transmission housings, and within minutes, 12 German tanks were immobilized. By 5:35 hours, Soviet forces had penetrated 900 meters past German anti-tank ditches, sustaining 28 tank losses of their own but disabling over 30 Panzers, including 2 Tiger Is. Meanwhile, at a command vehicle behind the front, General Hoth heard a chaotic update from SS radio operator Untersturmführer Karl-Heinz Kremer. Mass T-34s on both flanks. Panther breakdowns increasing. Kremer was unaware Soviet signals officer Captain Ivan Grigoriev had intercepted the same German frequencies, relaying tank positions to Soviet artillery. Weather at 5:40 hours. Wind speed 8 kph, visibility reduced to 900 meters, temperature 22 degrees C. Dust clouds masked the advancing T-34s and confused German rangefinders. At 5:45 hours, a T-34-76 at 400 meters destroyed a Panther D. General Hoth ordered all reserves forward based on these urgent reports, not realizing Prokhorovka's southern sector was collapsing. By 5:54 hours, more than 70 German tanks were out of action. But at 5:55 hours, Soviet armored formations initiated the final envelopment at both flanks, a maneuver that would prove decisive. At 5:57 hours, Oberleutnant Hans-Ulrich Freiherr von Luck, commanding the 2nd Company, 24th Panzer Regiment, realized something was wrong as his Panther Ausf. D tanks struggled to advance near Hill 252. 2. The radio chatter was unusually intense. SGT. Ernst Mayr in Panther 204 reported a total loss of both mobility and turret traverse. 17 Panthers in the lead platoon were immobilized within a 700-meter sector. Their Maybach HL-230 engines, emitting a harsh metallic knocking, and hydraulic pressures, dropping below 45 bar instead of the standard 80. 85 words, tactically, this meant the planned Schwerpunkt assault had failed before contact with the main Soviet defensive line. German doctrine expected a minimum 60% operational mobility rate in first-wave tanks, but by 6:02 hours, frontline reports tallied 21 Panthers immobilized by mechanical failure, only 36% operational at the point of attack. Major Egon Wamsler forwarded this data via SCR-299 radio to divisional command in under 3 minutes. 80 words, on the Soviet side, Colonel Vasily Sharov of the 31st Tank Corps observed the German confusion from an op near Storozhevoy. Noting that Panther units had halted, he ordered his T-34-76 companies to exploit the northwestern gap. Soviet intelligence, confirming the German radio net-S breakdown, greenlit a flanking maneuver. 74 T-34s shifted west, overwhelming the 9th Panzer Grenadier Infantry positions. In 12 minutes, Soviet artillery delivered 364 rounds of 122 shells, targeting immobilized tanks. 85 words, within the German 4th Panzer Army, Oberfeldwebel Heinrich Klossmann's squad of the 13th Panzer Division struggled to relay any messages, as the Fu G5 radios in their vehicles jammed or overheated. Believing sabotage or enemy U intervention, Major Friedrich Cross ordered a manual switch to reserve frequencies, but garbled transmission prevented coordination. Tank commanders dismounted under fire to seek visual orders. By 6:11 hours, Battalion HQ had lost contact with more than half its companies. 80 words by 6:12 hours, the realization of disaster had spread across the entire German armored vanguard. Elements of the 11th and 13th Panzer, divisions comprising 47 Panthers, 32 Panzer IVs, and 4 Tigers, were immobilized or lost radio contact within a 2-kilometer front, granting Soviet commanders control of every engagement axis in that sector. 70 words, the Panther Ausf. D medium tank, introduced in May 1943, was engineered for sustained operations. Its HL-230P30 12-cylinder engine rated at 700 horsepower, mated to the ZF AK-7-200 transmission, designed for loads up to 45 metric tons. The cast steel final drive assembly, however, proved vulnerable under thermal strain exceeding 160 degrees C, sustained during high RPM maneuvers. When ambient temperatures exceeded 20 degrees C and operating cycles surpassed 32 minutes without pause, the transmission lubricant pressure dropped below 45 bar, causing gear seizure and loss of forward drive. Factory acceptance tests at MAN AG, Nuremberg in April 1943 had not simulated continuous high-speed, off-road advance over freshly plowed steppe in 22 degrees C ambient temperatures. As a result, the Maybach system's operational limits under field stress were largely theoretical. Additional factors find dust ingress clogging the oil filter after just 13 kilometers, inconsistent gear hardening in chassis numbers 210,001 to 210,050, and inadequate forced air cooling amplified the risk of simultaneous failure. The commitment to expose the Panther D as the spearhead of XLVII Panzer Corps was ordered by General Friedrich Paulus on July 2 at 22:30 hours, based on Army Group South's Intelligence Summary HGR Sud NR 148-43. The briefing cited intercepted Soviet supply train manifests showing only 185 T-34s at Prokhorovka, underestimating readiness by 54%. This assessment neglected evidence of new Soviet tactical radio protocols. By contrast, at the Third Battle of Kharkov, cooler weather and paved approaches enabled 94% Panther operational rate during the first 48 hours, versus just 37% at Prokhorovka due to rapid breakdowns and communication overload. Captured records from Panzer Regiment 39 indicated 112 out of 187 Panthers disabled primarily by transmission failure, not enemy fire. General Hoth's 5 July 1100 hours report described catastrophic immobilization by thermal overload, exacerbated by air intake clogging. Post-war testimony from Hauptmann Wilhelm Lindemann confirmed that tank-to-tank radio nets failed within 14 minutes due to excessive duration under battle conditions. German archives, BAMA RH 27-12-998C, show a 61% higher rate of mechanical loss at Kursk compared to Kharkov, directly correlating to advances made under near-identical tactical doctrine, but harsher technical and environmental stress. 350 words Panzer Regiment 24 under Oberstleutnant Maximilian von Lochert halted its advance at 6:20 hours after the lead Panther companies had broken down or lost contact. Within 23 minutes, German armored strength in the sector dropped from 87 to 28 operational tanks. 146 crew members from von Lochert's regiment were forced to abandon their vehicles under Soviet 122 artillery fire, resulting in 37 captured by Soviet infantry. This collapse opened a 13-kilometer frontage west of Hill 252, which Soviet units exploited by forcing a wedge through the German second line. The 32nd Tank Brigade redirected 2 T-34 companies from defensive reserve duties to an all-out flanking thrust aimed at encircling remaining German strongpoints near Storozhevoy. General Hoth at Forward HQ received confirmation of this breakdown at 6:27 hours. He immediately ordered a halt to further Panther advances, instructing the 13th and 11th Panzer Divisions to refocus defensive resources on anti-infantry and anti-tank positions, impacting approximately 4,200 troops over a 3.6-kilometer sector. Plans for northern counterattacks were postponed in favor of locally concentrated fire missions by remaining operational Tigers and attached Flak 36 batteries. Communications Officer Major Gunzel rerouted all liaison traffic to 3 backup radio vehicles, shifting company-level command to wire field phones to compensate for radio net failure. A high-priority message, H. G Sud/Op/478, at 6:32 ordered all surviving mobile units to regroup behind anti-tank ditches east of Pokrovka. By 6:44 hours, the Voronezh front's penetration between Bykovka and Pokrovka stood at 2 kilometers. Soviet tank units advanced this sector 47 minutes ahead of schedule. The casualty rate among German tank crews was 32% higher than initial forecasts. 204 projected versus 269 confirmed. These developments delayed the planned encirclement by Army Group South by more than 10 hours, contributed to the loss of 70 operational tanks, and allowed Soviet forces to seize momentum west of the Sel River. Post-war estimates attribute the avoidance of up to 550 Soviet casualties and an acceleration of the Prokhorovka breakout by at least half a day to this German technical collapse. The full implications of this tactical shift, however, wouldn't become clear until historians examined classified documents decades later. Documents recovered in 1996 from Russia's Central Archive detailed the personal logbook of Unteroffizier Hermann Kehl, loader in Panther 405, 2nd Company, Panzer Regiment 39. Kehl wrote on July 5, 1943, "Stalled again, smoke in turret, gears clashing. Radio out, Hauptmann shouting orders no one can hear, some crew bailing under fire. Mechanics say there's nothing for it." This first-hand account directly contradicted the official Panzer Regiment report, which insisted mechanical readiness exceeded 80%. The gap existed due to frontline censorship and incentives to exaggerate performance for Berlin. This log remained unknown outside Soviet files until the 1996 archive transfer. Supply records from the 11th Panzer Division, logged at 21:45 hours July 4, showed a severe shortage of replacement transmissions. Depot manifests listed 12 units available, though official planning figures required 48. This 75% deficit critically limited on-site repairs for Panthers damaged during initial engagements. Quartermaster Stabsfeldwebel Emil Richter formally reported the transmission shortage to division headquarters, but the message was not relayed to Army Group South until after the offensive had stalled, as staff assumed local improvisation would suffice. This logistical constraint meant over half of immobilized Panther tanks could not be returned to service, directly shaping the tactical options available to frontline commanders. The July 6 after-action summary from 4th Panzer Army Headquarters stated 58 Panther losses and 21 total write-offs in the previous 24 hours. However, captured German strength reports found in Soviet files, dated July 5, listed 112 Panthers disabled solely by mechanical breakdown. Medical unit records from Sanitetskompagnie 13 corroborated a total of 103 wounded tank crew evacuated, compared to the officially reported 61. Historian Oleg Kaislev's 2011 research, using both German and Soviet archival sources, elucidated that the discrepancy, nearly a 72% difference in mechanical losses, emerged from double-counting combat damage and misattributing breakdowns as recoverable. While operational doctrine emphasized massed panzer assaults to achieve local superiority, positions near Storozhevoy encountered unanticipated issues. By 5:30, crews of the 2nd Battalion, Panzer Regiment 24, found their tanks bogged on freshly loosened topsoil from overnight Soviet artillery barrages. Unteroffizier Franz Goebbels adapted by ordering the use of spare track links to create temporary traction mats, a tactic later recorded in 47 separate after-action reports. Post-war interviews with 19 tank veterans confirmed this widespread workaround when operational guidance failed to account for degraded step conditions. The doctrine of rapid advance was retained despite these realities until formal update in autumn 1943, primarily because senior staff believed breakdowns resulted from isolated local failures, not systemic issues. Atmospheric data gathered by the Voronezh Front Meteorological Detachment at 4:40 hours July 5 recorded an ambient temperature of 22.1 degrees C, relative humidity of 74%, and visibility below 950 meters due to dust. Pre-battle German plans anticipated 14 to 17 degrees C and 95% visibility at over 1,200 meters. The 6-degree temperature mismatch accelerated Panther transmission failures, with the ZF AK-7-200 system rated nominally for operation only up to 15 degrees C, without augmented cooling, suffering pressure loss and seizure after prolonged exertion. This was conclusively identified only through Bundesarchiv technical analysis in 1958, finally explaining the mass immobilization of the Panther fleet at Kursk. These overlooked details aligned with additional field evidence unearthed by historians examining unit diaries, maintenance logs, and Soviet artillery placement maps. Post-war analysis completed in 1948 by the U.S. Army Historical Division concluded that the German defeat at Prokhorovka stemmed chiefly from Soviet tactical surprise and massed armored assault, attributing tank losses primarily to enemy fire. Military historian General Sir Basil Liddell-Hart's 1956 book, The Other Side of the Hill, reinforced this position, relying on Wehrmacht officer interviews and captured war diaries available at the time. The official Bundeswehr military history, published in 1958, listed Panther casualties at 58 for July 5, ascribing most to combat damage. This interpretation was accepted without major challenge for nearly 3 decades, in part due to the classified status of Soviet operational archives and the destruction or suppression of German technical logs during the war's final months. Researchers thus relied on incomplete statistics and officer memoirs, which reflected the prevailing perceptions of frontline experience and institutional pride. Declassification of German maintenance logs and newly accessible Soviet unit records in 1989 materially altered this assessment. Historian Oleg Kislev's 2011 comparative study of the Russian State Military Archive, RGVA, and Bundesarchiv records exposed that at least 112 Panther immobilizations derived from non-combat mechanical failure. Cited in Kislev's study, losses not by shot or shell, but seized engines, leaking transmissions. When compared against the Third Battle of Kharkov, where lower temperatures and prepared roads permitted a 94% Panther operational rate for 48 hours, Kursk's 37% rate exposed the crucial role of environmental and technical limitations. Unlike Kharkov, where breakdowns accounted for less than 20% of tank losses, in Prokhorovka, over 60% of Panther casualties had no battle damage. This revealed that German planning fundamentally underestimated the mechanical limits of its new armored spearhead under real battlefield conditions, a lesson absent from initial accounts, but pivotal for understanding operational outcomes. Research published in 2020 by the Leibniz Institute and military archivist Dr. Angela Hartmann used newly digitized repair reports to recalculate total German armored losses. The earlier consensus cited 58 Panthers lost at Prokhorovka. Hartmann's team documented 132 tanks disabled or abandoned, a 127% upward revision, nearly 2/3 due to mechanical breakdown. Nevertheless, a few historians, such as David Stahel, posit the operational impact was overstated, noting that some tanks were later repaired, and that Soviet resilience was the decisive factor rather than pure German hardware failure. Mainstream analyses, confirmed by Bundesarchiv Microfilm Review in 2019, maintain that on July 5, mechanical issues prevented German doctrine from functioning as designed. Contemporary debate centers on whether the Panther's debut was a premature commitment or a necessary risk, given operational imperatives affecting broader conclusions about German armored innovation and battlefield adaptation at Kursk. Alois Schulz, Feldwebel, 2nd Company, Panzer Regiment 39, age 28, from Dresden, was positioned northeast of Pokrovka on July 5, 1943. Prior to conscription, he worked as a machinist in Saxony. At 5:50 hours, Schulz faced a harrowing choice as his Panther's engine seized and radio failed under heavy artillery fire. In his 1975 taped testimony, he recalled, "I saw 2 crews try to fix their tanks and get cut down. I told my men we run for the gully live to fight, lieber Kameraden, not die for a dead machine." His decision to abandon the tank under fire saved all 5 crew members. Schulz suffered shrapnel wounds but survived, later becoming a railway supervisor in East Germany. Interviewed again in 1991 at age 76, he reflected, "It was the order we never trained for, but it was the only one that mattered." He died in Dresden in 2003. His oral history is held at the Militärhistorisches Museum der Bundeswehr, Dresden. Yevgeny Krasnov, junior lieutenant, 32nd Tank Brigade, experienced that same sector from the opposite trench. Captured on July 5 after his T-34 was disabled by a Tiger, Krasnov's subsequent interrogation on July 7 revealed his misunderstanding of German radio failure. "We thought the panzers were feigning collapse, but they just seemed confused, not coordinated." After the war, Krasnov became a tractor factory worker and in 1972 attended a reconciliation event in Kursk. His story concurred with German accounts that confusion, not discipline, dominated the German retreat, but differed in attributing the Soviet breakthrough mostly to artillery, not technical German weakness. Anna Keller, a civilian living near Bykovka, was displaced after her home was destroyed in the artillery exchange. She spent the day hiding in a drainage ditch as tanks burned and shells fell, later suffering from acute hearing loss. Medical records from 1946 list nerve trauma and partial deafness, typical of at least 11% of Kursk area civilian survivors. By 1952, Keller relocated to Moscow for work in public health advocacy. Her testimony was used by the Russian Society for the Study of Trauma to highlight the civilian toll of the tank battles. The widespread trauma experienced by individuals like Keller helped shape Soviet post-war policy on veteran and civilian rehabilitation programs. These individual experiences, when examined across hundreds of combatant and civilian testimonies, revealed patterns of improvisation, confusion, and resilience that influenced both immediate tactical adaptation and long-term strategic doctrine on both sides. Within 24 minutes of the Panther tank immobilizations at 6:02 hours on July 5, 1943, the German 4th Panzer Army's operational strength on the southern Kursk sector plummeted. General Hermann Hoth at the Forward Command post near Prokhorovka received confirmation from his regimental liaisons at 6:27 hours. Only 28 out of 87 tanks remained mobile. On this intelligence, Hoth ordered all advances halted and redirected 4,200 German troops from offensive to defensive positions over a 3-6-kilometer frontage. Panzer Regiment 24 was shifted from its original thrust toward Prokhorovka south to defensive lines east of Pokrovka, affording survivors a protective fallback by 7:30. Field reports recorded German operational mobility improving marginally from 32% at 6:45 hours to 38% by 900 after emergency recovery efforts. Within 3 days, operational directives across the southern salient shifted. Operation Citadel's planned northern pincer, originally scheduled for July 7, was delayed by 48 hours, disrupting overall momentum. Generaloberst Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Armored Troops, authorized transfer of 32 additional Tigers to reinforce the sector after the Panther failure. This diversion came at the expense of the Orel sector, which surrendered 19 scheduled replacement tanks, reducing their strength projection from 75 to 56 panzers. Casualty projections were amended. An initial German forecast of 1,100 for July 5 to 8 was revised upward to 1,545 killed or wounded. Medical supply requirements rose from 340 to 480 units, with morphine consumption increasing by 27%. By late August, the campaign's balance had shifted. The Soviet penetration near Bykovka and Pokrovka was completed on July 9, 4 days ahead of the original German estimate. This success permitted the subsequent offensive known as Operation Polkovodets-Rumyantsev to proceed on July 15, cutting off German efforts to stabilize the southern front. The Dobrovo-Lebedino supply corridor, originally expected to remain in German hands until at least August 5, was lost on July 23. 5 major Soviet advances were enabled across a 6-week interval, with General Hoth transferred to the reserve on August 12. 6 regimental officers from 11th and 13th Panzer Divisions received formal reprimands for unpreparedness. Armored doctrine shifted. Panzer operational readiness inspections and technical vetting were mandated force-wide by September 1943. The direction of the Eastern Front changed. Subsequent offensives, including the Belgorod-Kharkov operation, were launched 10 days ahead of German projections, opening a 142-kilometer breach northwest of Belgorod by September 3. German-held territory in the Kursk sector was reduced by 780 square kilometers in 5 weeks, achieving Soviet control on September 7 instead of the previously projected October 15. By reallocating 117 serviceable vehicles and 4 battalions made available after the Panther withdrawal, Soviet commanders redirected pressure onto Army Group South. Planners who believed a 1943 stalemate was feasible now faced a cascading withdrawal, as Soviet advances outpaced German reinforcement by a full month. These operational shifts informed strategic decisions at the highest levels of command throughout the 1943 summer campaign. Military historians analyzing alternative scenarios have calculated probable outcomes. If the Panther mechanical failures and loss of radio cohesion on July 5 had not crippled the German attack, the entire Allied timetable for the southern Kursk salient would have shifted. The Red Army's Operation Polkovodets-Rumiantsev could not have begun before July 28, approximately 2 weeks later than the actual July 15 start, due to the continued German ability to contest the Baikov-Prokhorovka corridor and retain additional operational armor. This assessment is rooted in fuel and ammunition supply rates, as well as tank readiness standards outlined in German logistic group documents recovered from Bundesarchiv. Counterfactual casualty projections provided by Dr. Angela Hartmann's 2020 study at the Leibniz Institute estimate between 2,500 and 3,200 additional Soviet casualties would have resulted from a forced flank assault along the northern access route. Given that Soviet tank losses at Prokhorovka were 25% lower due to the German collapse, territorial control over the Sel River approaches would have remained under German authority until approximately August 10, 4 weeks longer than the historical record, as calculated from Soviet afteraction map overlays and German ordnance resupply rates. The 4th Panzer Army would have retained the ability to launch local counterattacks until at least mid-July, complicating Soviet efforts to isolate Belgorod and delay strategic offensives on the Donets River. Comparing the outcome at Prokhorovka to the Third Battle of Kharkov, Kursk involved 2,700 German armored vehicles over a 15-kilometer sector in 39 minutes, resulting in a 780 square kilometer territorial swing. Kharkov featured 1,200 tanks over a 27-kilometer axis during 5 days, yielding only partial German gains. The Frunze Military Academy and German Führungsakademie analyze Prokhorovka to illustrate the primacy of technical and logistical resilience over pure tactical doctrine. 41% of all Soviet armored advances in July-August 1943 can be traced to breakthroughs at Prokhorovka, versus 19% attributed to Kharkov. Historian Oleg Kaislev's 2011 comparative evaluation ranks the Panther's technical collapse as the third most decisive event among 17 measured during the Battle of Kursk, employing a matrix of operational tempo and divisional attrition rates. The academic assessment. Most scholars agree mechanical and communication failures, rather than a direct clash of doctrine, define the pivotal moment. Kaislev, RGVA, finds his interpretation supported by cross-referenced maintenance logs, whereas Dr. David Stahel at UNSW cautions that Soviet resilience more than hardware made the difference. The central question remains whether German armored innovation was prematurely rushed or tactically misapplied. Primary sources from field diaries and war production archives reveal consensus that technical constraints decisively altered the operational calculus. Declassified Oberkommando directives from September 1943 confirm a force-wide inspection regime was implemented in response. The preponderance of evidence shows Prokhorovka's July 5 engagement was a major turning point based on measured operational readiness, attrition rate, and strategic timing. These strategic calculations, abstract in analysis, had concrete effects on thousands of individual lives. Ulwa Schulz, Feldwebel, 2nd Company, Panzer Regiment 39 played a direct role in the events east of Pokrovka. After surviving mechanical failure and artillery fire, Schulz returned to Dresden in 1945, where he spent 39 years as a railway supervisor. He dedicated his later life to veteran outreach and provided 14 years of oral testimony for war archives and reconciliation projects. In a recorded 1991 interview by Dr. Werner Schulz at the Militärhistorisches Museum der Bundeswehr, he said, "We waited for orders that never came. The machines failed, and so did every rule we were taught. It was chaos, and we had to live past it." Schulz remained in contact with 11 fellow crew members. His memoir is catalogued at the Bundeswehr Military Archive in Dresden. He died in 2003 at age 88 in his home city. The Prokhorovka Tank Memorial, located on the former battlefield, was dedicated on August 9, 1995. Its central obelisk and etched bronze relief commemorate both the Soviet and German armored crews who fought and fell on July 5, 1943. Each year on July 5, remembrance ceremonies draw more than 6,000 attendees. The 60th anniversary event in 2003 featured surviving veterans and Russian-German delegations, with the placement of time capsules and the unveiling of additional historical markers. The Russian General Staff Academy integrates the Battle of Prokhorovka into its operational leadership curriculum to emphasize the risks of technical overconfidence. In 1994, the Russian Army standardized a pre-combat technical inspection protocol derived from lessons learned at Kursk. The Russian Military Archive in Moscow now holds over 17,000 original combat logs and 680 oral veteran testimonies from this event. Lessons in tactical failure and adaptation at Prokhorovka have informed contemporary strategy. The principle of technical reliability over untested innovation was crucial in the Russian 2008 South Ossetia operation, according to a MOD analysis prepared that year. The U.S. Army's 2017 review of Germany's Panther experience at Kursk directly drove design revisions for the M1A2 SEP-V3 Abrams transmission cooling systems. Command doctrine reforms followed a 1988 Bundeswehr report on radio net failure at Prokhorovka, triggering new communication redundancy standards in 1989. The original battlefield, spanning over 14 square kilometers, is preserved as a protected educational reserve, welcoming more than 90,000 visitors a year. On July 5, 1943, near Prokhorovka, 146 tank crews facing technical failure and encirclement were overtaken within 39 minutes. The sudden immobilization altered the southern Kursk campaign by 22 days, determined control over 780 square kilometers, and shifted the balance of the Eastern Front for the remainder of 1943.